Okay, biology, this is Mr. B here, and we are continuing on with our chapter on cells. We are on section 3, and this is entitled Cell Boundaries. So when you think of a boundary, you think of maybe the end of an area, kind of a marking of where you can and can't go. When in terms of a cell, a boundary is just what we call is on the outside. So the outside edges of the cell are going to be known as the boundary. So all cells are surrounded by a thin, flexible barrier known as the cell membrane. So this is one of our characteristics that every single cell has in common. So all cells are surrounded by this thin, flexible barrier known as the cell membrane. And many cells also produce a strong supporting layer around the membrane known as a cell wall. Two of the main ones being fungi and plants, and there are some others, but again, cell membrane, all cells have one of those, and then many cells have a cell wall. So not every single cell will have a cell wall. So we're going to take a closer look at the cell membrane, and then what is the main function of the cell membrane is what we're going to ask ourselves. And the cell membrane regulates what enters and leaves a cell and also provides protection and support. So it kind of controls all the different water, all the different molecules and everything that's going to come in and out of the cell, and it also is going to provide some support. So if we didn't have that cell membrane, then how are we going to have our cell hold itself together? The cell membrane keeps everything intact. It keeps everything in one defined area. If not, we would just have a big pile of mass of organelles laying around everywhere, and they wouldn't be able to serve their function because they wouldn't be in close enough contact to function. So the cell membrane keeps kind of everything together. And the cell membrane is composed of what's called a lipid bilayer. So lipid we said was fat, and then bi just means two, and layer is just layer. So it's two layers of fat is what the cell has in it. The cell membrane is made up of two layers of fat, and it gives a flexible structure that forms a barrier between the cell and its surroundings. So again, that's just going back to its function. And again, just lipid bilayer, it kind of sounds confusing, but we just know lipid just means fat components, and then bi means two, and layer, so it's just two layers of fat. And then most cell membranes contain protein molecules embedded in the lipid bilayer, some of which have carbohydrate molecules attached to them. We will get into these more specifically. Just know the fact that there are proteins and carbohydrates just embedded throughout the nucleus, throughout the cell membrane, and they all serve different functions, mainly being what comes in and what goes out of the cell. So cell walls. What are the main function of the cell walls? So the main function of the cell wall is to provide support and protection for the cell. It's going to be very rigid, and it's not going to have a lot of room for support, or it's not going to have a lot of room for support, not going to have a lot of room for movement. So it will provide a lot of support. It's going to be very rigid, very structured. When we look at plant cells, they almost have a squared off appearance because they're so defined by that cell wall. And cell walls are found in plants, algae, fungi, and many prokaryotes, so those would be like bacteria and things like that. And the cell wall lies outside the cell membrane. So again, it'll be, if we had a picture, I think most of you that made a plant cell in class kind of saw that the plant cell went around the outside of the cell membrane. And most cell walls are porous enough to allow water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and certain other substances pass through easily. So they're not completely solid. They're going to be able to allow some things to pass through, and it's just, again, mainly there to provide strength. It's not really, this isn't the one that's going to choose what comes in and out. The cell membrane is going to choose what goes in and out. So cell walls mainly for structure and support, whereas the cell membrane is going to decide what comes in and out of the cell, as well as giving structure and support. So that was it for the first part of this chapter, first part of this section. Let me know if you have any questions.